Commanding lead, wide advantage, deep inroads, enormous margins, towering advantage, dominant lead, and that's just the beginning of a New York Times story about the latest New York Times Siena College poll on the presidential race. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, the New York Times, there's an old saying in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads, kind of a sardonic commentary on the fact that newspapers go for the shallow. In this case, if it bleeds, it leads means that the Trump campaign is bleeding in the eyes of the New York Times, according to their latest poll. All of those adjectives or adjectival phrases were used, most of them in the lead sentence of the story, to describe the fact that Joe Biden now has, among registered voters, not likely voters, but registered voters nationwide, a 14-point lead. The headline calls that a dominant lead. Now, Bill, I want to state up front the weaknesses of this poll because I think it'll become obvious very quickly to anybody who reads the story. Registered voters are not the same as
New York Times. Let's start with New York Times.
But registered voters are not the same as actual voters and not even the same as likely voters. There are a lot of people who are registered to vote who rarely, if ever, actually show up to vote. And then the other obvious weakness is it's a national poll and presidents aren't elected by a national majority. They're elected state by state. But given that, Bill, they're pointing out in this story that these numbers are getting worse for President Trump. You have previously said that don't worry about that right now. Get out there and work hard if you're a Republican to reelect the president. But doesn't this raise the concerns to a new level?
No, in fact, I've never thought we were behind in this race, and I don't think we're behind now. But let's just get something perfectly clear about polls, especially polls taken at this time, and especially polls taken at this time with this particular opponent. Anytime you run against nobody, your numbers are going to be bad. If you had Donald Trump versus generic Democratic candidate, he'd probably be down by 30 points. This is the fallacy involved with this particular kind of poll right now, and especially with respect to Joe Biden. In other words, Donald Trump has been on the job for 4 years, and whatever people don't like about Donald Trump, they got to see for 4 years. They have a vision of Joe Biden that in many cases, in most cases probably, is the vision prepared by the people who create the servo mechanisms that allow Joe Biden to read a line or two. And not everybody looks as deeply into these things as we do, needless to say. Not everybody has seen just exactly how mentally unfit Joe Biden is. And furthermore, not very many of those people with that poll, I'd be willing to bet you, have seen things like the 4-minute assembly of Joe Biden groping people and having them simply just cringe.
Well, Bill, the argument can be made that they never will see those things. And unless Biden performs a massive facepalm or faceplant on the floor in the middle of a presidential debate, they're unlikely to see it.
Well, first of all, it is true that the media will never show those things, and they will do everything they can to keep the indentation on the floor with Joe Biden's face in it out of the public eye. But he is going to do a face palm because he cannot not do one. If we were praying for a major gaffe or something, if Donald Trump's only hope were that Biden would make some fluky, weird kind of statement, we'd be in a different situation right now. But Biden can't finish sentences, And as far as the gropey video is concerned, no, you're absolutely right. The media won't run it, but Donald Trump will. He absolutely will. And when you see that, when you see that compilation, which is cringe-inducing, and when you see Joe Biden struggle to finish sentences, now, instead of the situation, then rather, as opposed to now it will not be Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, who right now is a lawn sign. Joe Biden's a lawn sign. He is the opposition. When people actually see what the opponent is actually like, that's assuming he's still intact in 3 or 4 months. Then this poll is going to be different. And by the way, folks, if you think that the New York Times is ever going to publish a poll that has Donald Trump in the lead before Election Day, you're out of your minds. I have more respect for Rasmussen, but the thing that really matters, and I think this was proven in 2016 in an enormous way. And let's not forget, by the way, that the headwind that Donald Trump was up against in 2016 was probably a 20 or 30 point headwind in terms of media bias. That's nothing compared to what they're doing this time. Last time they hated him and went and didn't give him a break, but they didn't think he would win. Now they have all the daggers out. So I'm looking at things like enthusiasm. I'm looking at things like commitment and passion. And when we just did a show on this, just did a right angle on this, the only time I've been worried during this entire campaign at all was a couple days ago when for 24 hours I saw the results of that Trump rally with the, a third empty, half empty. I thought, now that's not good. That genuinely worried me. Then I found out the whole thing was a prank on the part of teenage hipsters being encouraged to do it by school teachers in one case anyway. And then I realized, oh, okay. So it's not that the Trump enthusiasm is down. It's that one time they decided to play a kind of a sneak attack kind of thing. All right. They well executed. Granted, they don't get to do that twice. And so all they've done is make the base more angry. If the New York Times is saying that watching the streets burn is helping Joe Biden, then they're out of their minds.
No, they're saying that watching the streets burn and watching the COVID-19 pandemic roll forward is going to be laid at the doorstep of President Trump. Let me read you this one sentence or two sentences in a short paragraph here. And this is pretty high up in the story that the New York Times wrote about its poll with Siena College. Mr. Trump has been an unpopular president for virtually his entire time in office. He has made, and I think this is the key sentence really, he's made few efforts since his election in 2016 to broaden his support beyond the right-wing base that vaulted him into office with only 46% of the popular vote and a modest victory in the Electoral College. So what the Times is basically saying is they would probably agree with you under ordinary circumstances that Joe Biden is currently a yard sign. But the reality is some people will vote for a yard sign rather than a guy that they don't like.
Another problem with this poll is that this poll was taken with Donald Trump versus a yard sign, and the poll is also taken before Donald Trump has begun to fight. It's easy to say, well, we're just going to go in there. How many times has this happened in military history? Oh, well, they're just a bunch of rabble. We'll just go in there and clean them up. It'd be nothing to it. The enemy gets a vote too. And Donald Trump gets a vote too in this. And Donald Trump has a campaign, and he has not begun his campaign yet. When he starts running it's video evidence. It's not an accusation. It's video after video after video of people cringing. Put that aside. When you get to things like COVID-19 and the George Floyd thing, which are obviously the key stories of the year so far, 2020, I suspect has been brewing for a long time in the nether regions and may not be done with this yet. But what they're saying is that people don't approve of Donald Trump's handling of COVID-19. They don't approve of his handling to the degree that they don't approve of his handling of COVID-19. They don't approve of it because the media has basically told everybody that Donald Trump is responsible for all of this. But when Donald Trump gets into campaign mode, Donald Trump will be able to come out and say, I was told that there would be 2.2 million deaths in America, and right now we have 200,000. It's a national tragedy, but it's a tenth of what they were doing. And then he'll be able to point to Democrats like Cuomo, who forced sick people into nursing homes. He'll be able to look at the George Floyd thing and say, I offered to produce federal troops to basically restore law and order, but the Democrats wouldn't do it. And it's not my job to force the federal government onto state and local issues. So anytime they need the help, I've been offering it, but they wouldn't take it. So he's letting them own that too.
Well, it's funny you say that, Bill, because the New York Times specifically references something like what you just said. They said that the concern among voters has deepened as Trump's administration, and this is the two elements, failed to stop a deadly disease that crippled the economy, and then as he responded to a wave of racial justice protests with angry bluster and militaristic threats. Now, the Times thinks that the militaristic threats had hurt him. You're saying that that's a strong point for him.
just listen to the language that they used here. He failed to stop a deadly pandemic. This deadly pandemic came out of China. And the person who's been tough on China has been Donald Trump. He's been called a racist for it. The people who were saying, no, there's nothing to worry about, are Andrew Cuomo, Bill de Blasio, Nancy Pelosi. If you don't think that those campaign ads will not show March 17th, Nancy Pelosi, oh, come on down to Chinatown, nothing to worry about. Donald Trump, January, cuts all traffic to China. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying it's easy to complete your victory lap when you haven't gone to battle yet. And it's easy to talk about how far ahead you are when the enemy hasn't even shown up to fight yet, let alone started to fight. All of these things are going to redound to his credit, and what they're saying, I mean, the language of that is he failed to stop a deadly pandemic. Really? Is that what he did? He failed to stop a deadly pandemic. Who did stop a deadly pandemic? I think the only people the Times can point to who stopped the deadly pandemic would be if they believed the communist Chinese who launched this plague on the world in the first place and used totalitarian control, including welding people into their apartments in order to contain the damage that they'd already done. And their numbers are nothing like accurate. And Donald Trump will point that out too. So look, what the Times is doing, let's just remember one thing here. Okay, let's just remember one thing. This is another right angle show we did this week. We had a really good set this week, I thought. We talked on this episode about people leaving New York City, about the blue exodus from New York City, top businesses leaving New York City, businesses that are paying $4,700 a square foot on Fifth Avenue, out. They're leaving. Everybody wants to leave New York City, including the people who work for the New York Times. They want to get the hell out of New York City. New York City is run by a Democrat who's a progressive. New York State is also run by a Democrat who's a progressive. The people are leaving blue cities in droves. You cannot put an end to this exodus. And the New York Times wants us to believe that people are going to vote blue when these bluest of the blue are leaving these cobalt blue islands of blueness and fleeing out into Redville. They actually think that the mood of the country is blue? Are they out of their minds? No, they're not out of their minds. They're shills, and they're doing what shills do. First of all, they're towing the Communist Party line. This is Donald Trump's fault. It's not Donald Trump's fault. It doesn't matter how well or how badly he did. I think he did pretty well. If you're looking at a 2 million dead projection, I think he's going to run a couple laps on that one. But nevertheless, it's not Donald Trump's fault about the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the Communist Party of China's fault. And all of this stuff is Scott, all of it is what the whole reason we're having this discussion about this particular story is because it appeared in the New York Times. And if this had appeared in the Akron Daily, Advertiser, we wouldn't be having this discussion. And my point is that the Akron Daily Advertiser has a considerably higher level of reliability and accuracy than the New York Times does. So we're talking about this story because what was once a great newspaper is continuing to do things like this to drag the corpse of their philosophy across the line. And what's particularly galling about all this is that the New York Times is fabricating this story in order to make blue voters feel good about a blue victory in November when they are packing their bags to get the living hell out of Blueville and move into red America as fast as they possibly can. And that's not a one-off. If the people who are in the skyscrapers of the New York Times building in Manhattan are trying to get the hell out of democratically run cities and get out into the red country where all those Trump idiots are, if they're packing their bags to move and they think that the country is like, oh no, what we really want is we want some more progressives. We want a guy like Joe Biden who donated to getting looters out of jail. That's who we want. No.
Let's
it's
finish
not true.
on as close to a positive note as we can get in this New York Times
That is
story.
a positive note.
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying from the perspective of the questions I'm asking you here and the story itself. This is the closest thing you get to positive in this particular New York Times story. And I'll lead
I
into
see.
it with the negatives that they start with, that Biden is enjoying an enormous lead with blacks and Hispanics, better than Hillary Clinton had, that he has a towering advantage in this poll with women, and specifically college-educated women. He's plus 39 on that, where Hillary Clinton was only plus 7. That is, Biden is. And that 52% of whites under age 45 favor Biden, and only 30% favor Trump. However, there were two small things that they said offered Trump a path forward. Number one is that he still holds an edge on the economy, although it's a slim one, 50-45. And number two, and this is perhaps most relevant, Trump leads among non-college educated white voters, and the Midwest is crucial to getting to 270 electoral college votes.
He's also pushing 40% popularity among black voters, black male voters. And this part of those numbers are the part of what they're basing the entire article on is, as you said at the beginning, as you prefaced it, the difference between voters and likely voters. I mean, you can have 20 million people in their early 20s say they're going to go out and vote, and you might get 200 or 300 of them actually go out and do it. So I'm not worried about this. And by the way, I think that this is about as much damage as can be inflicted if we're going to look into the likely future. In other words, the pandemic has now reached its peak, and people are bored of it, and people in California are just openly mocking all of these Karens that we elected to high office. The Floyd things, the George Floyd thing is calming down, and the Democrats didn't get what they wanted. They not only didn't get what they wanted, Scott. The Democrats didn't get the one thing that they needed, that they absolutely needed. And what they needed in order to win this election was bloody shirts. That's what they needed, blood. They needed dead Americans in the form of Kent State. That's the only thing I could see that would have actually genuinely motivated people to get out and do all this stuff. But he didn't give it to him. This entire Antifa thing, this entire Antifa stand thing, could have been well. First, not only could have been closed down, could have been prevented by the mayor of Seattle and the governor of Washington, but they didn't do it because it was in their interest politically to not do it. And if that meant that the businesses in the Chaz zone, well, too bad for them. And the rapes and murders, that's just a tough break, kid. So what they wanted was open, armed lawlessness with warlords marching down the street. And what they wanted, since they wouldn't send in the National Guard, because that was a democratically controlled state National Guard, what they wanted to put Donald Trump in a situation where he had to send in the U.S. Army and tanks, and then somebody from the crowd in Antifa would have fired on the soldiers, and then there would have been dead Americans in the streets, and that was the only thing that they've got. And it didn't happen because Donald Trump is too smart for them. He's just too smart for them. He said, hey, listen, I can send in the federal troops anytime I get a request for them. I'm happy to do it. Just say the word. This is how our system of government works. And he took what was a trap for Donald Trump and turned it right around on the Democrats. And when they realized that he wasn't going to come in with tanks and bloody shirts and bodies being carried out, then all of a sudden they decided, maybe we should probably shut this thing down, I guess. So on. So there is in this country, and to some small degree, it's been the signal honor of my life and yours as well, to be able to be a voice for the people who don't say anything. This great silent majority that was so mocked by intellectuals when Richard Nixon talked about them, but the silent majority, the people who don't protest, the people who don't burn things down when they lose elections, the people who are decent, hardworking, honest people who want to be left alone and want to leave other people alone, these people who are not racist and have been called racist for 3 decades now, and they're not any of these things. These people, our people, have one recourse, and that is they get out and vote. And most of the time they don't. because most of the time, people like us think that politics is not really worth the time. We got better things to do. But when the boiler of this nation gets heated enough so that mass of what is normally just cold water turns into steam, then remarkable things happen. And I may be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. The giant silent middle of this country continues to be heated and heated and heated. And when they get hot enough, and that point is well past us now, the only thing that people like us do in terms of expressing our displeasure is going out and voting these miserable, lawless bastards out of office. And I think that is going to happen on a scale we haven't seen since, at the very least, 1980 or 1972.
The members of BillWhittle.com have made this kind of analysis of the breaking news of the day possible. We do more than 40 shows each month thanks to their generosity and their desire to sound the clarion of liberty around the world. Many of these videos are made available for free on YouTube and at BillWhittle.com. But there are some backstage episodes that only members can see, and then frankly, the most valuable part, I think, of the entire enterprise is the member-written blog and the comments among members as they discuss the important issues of the day away from the toxic sewer of social media. If you'd like to join a people like that, go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.